This episode is brought to you by MPB. Get cash for the kit you're not using or trade it in for the gear you want at mpb.com. Hey folks, in this interview, a little something special for you. I have the distinct pleasure and honor of sitting down with artist Steve Richard. This is TWiP. Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of This Week in Photo. I'm your host, Frederick Van Johnson. Today, I'm joined by artist Steve Richard. Steve and I are going to talk about his motivations for his art, a little bit about his process, and his view on just sort of the artistic community and the photographic community. Steve and I have had conversations offline and have talked a little bit about where his mind sits in this stuff. And I'll tell you, having conversations with Steve have adjusted the way that I look at photography in many ways, and hopefully it will impact you as well. Steve Richard, welcome to the show. How's it going?
It's going great, and thanks very much for taking some time to chat with me. I really, really appreciate it. Looking forward to it.
I am looking forward to this too. And you know, typically before I start these interviews, I ask the person that I'm interviewing, you know, how do you want me to refer to you when I do the introduction? Is it photographer? Is it artist? Is it digital storyteller? Is it, you know, God of all they survey? You know, what's the, and you said artist. Very few people just call me an artist. You know, can you talk about that a little bit? Why artist? And then we'll get into a little bit of your background.
Okay, this may ramble on a bit, but it's funny because I certainly started out as a photographer, and I used to love photography, and still do love looking at photography. But I really have a hard time trying to define the work I create, as especially I work, as you probably know, Frederick, you know, with 99% fine art nudes, to use this photography term, and I really hate the term because if you go search that, which I don't recommend, it produces a pretty big pile of shit, and I started to realize photography versus art has really been interesting and something I think about a lot and work with a lot, and it dawned on me a while ago that I'm actually not really interested in photography anymore. And meaning that photography, when I first started, was really about capturing images, going out and, if you wish, documenting things. And I used to love it a lot, but I started moving into creating images, creating stories, if you wish, creating moments that were really more about me and what's in my head and what I wanted to say. And I had a hard time trying to find a way to say, well, this is kind of like being a fine art photographer, but being a fine art photographer still didn't really do it for me. And I thought, well, really what I am is I'm an artist that uses a camera. And I love looking at photography, but I'm really not a photographer. I'm not really interested in going out down the street with my camera, or even going into the studio and you know, documenting things or capturing things. I'm really just interested in creating these moments or these stories that are really, in fact, about me or about my ideals, my ideas. So,
how do you reconcile that for you know, the millions of photographers that are out there that call themselves photographer and embrace that? Is it a journey that the photographers are sort of on this path from, you know, the seduction of the gear and the art form, and ultimately they'll, you know, maybe start becoming more about the art than the pixels and the whiz bang and the software and all that? Should it be a trajectory like that?
It should be for me, and was and is. But I think it's so personal. In fact, there's in my opinion, there's nothing wrong with being a photographer. In fact, photographer is great. I just fell out of love with being a photographer in a way, and though I still love looking at really great photography, I'm not interested in what most of the time makes up the definition of a photographer. And I think some people could juggle both very well. Some people are really good artists and really good photographers and walk the line in between them. And some people never leave the photography world. And, you know, even though they do certainly work that's artistic, I don't want to make it's kind of a gray area, but
Mm-hmm.
they approach it from the photography side. And once again, there's nothing wrong with that. It's crossing over into a very specific artist focus, I think is very personal and unique. And so I'm not sure that it's a journey that everybody takes or everybody wants to take whatsoever.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
And it depends, right? I was having a conversation earlier today with someone from a software company, one of the larger software companies in the industry, and we were having a conversation about AI, right? And we had a similar conversation at one of our TWiP member mixers previously, and the conversation centered around just this controversy that artificial intelligence, or applying those sorts of technologies to your images, some people think it's dishonest, and then other people think it's, hey, my pixels, I can do what I want to do with my pixels. My pixels, my choice, right? So, I know, as we'll move into talking about your process and your work a little bit. I'm curious as to where you fall on that, because a lot of photographers say, I'm a purist. I only mess with f-stops and shutter speeds, and I get it on the negative. If I don't get it on the negative, it ain't happening. And then on the other side, there are photographers that say, you know what, like our friend Renee Robin, will capture elements of the final piece and not attempt to capture it all in one frame. It's all about capturing pieces of a final work that then get executed or presented or orchestrated in the computer. Where do you fall on that? I mean, I know there's probably no one right answer to that, but which direction do you lean in?
Okay. Well, there is only one right answer, of course, and that's for each person. And for me, I fall into the once again, so from an artist perspective, I fall into I don't like to do any post-production. I certainly wouldn't let any decisions be made by AI or any other process. And maybe because maybe it's easier to describe it this way. For me, the difference, one of the main things that define an artist is the word intent. And for me, you have to have intent. If I look at, for example, a painter or a sculptor, every kind of brushstroke or every chisel mark or everything that happens on that piece of art is done with intent, even though some of it may be somewhat, in a way, random, but it still has this intent behind it. So for me, that's the number one thing is it has to be with intent. Every decision has to be with intent. And I would find it very difficult to use any type of AI or non-controllable system, anything that's even has some sort of randomness to it on any of my work, because then it would remove that intent, and I probably wouldn't feel like I had much to do with it. So that's number one. For me, the second part of whether I just despise post production. I don't have any enjoyment sitting in front of a computer. Mm-hmm. I love getting it right in camera, and getting it right. I mean, for me, getting it right. So I do everything to get it in camera, whether it's film, and of course, in the last 15 years or so, I've been shooting digital, but it's still. I get it in the shot, and if I can't get it in that shot, I won't accept the image. But the irony is, for example, you mentioned Renee, and I actually look at Renee as another artist. She does a lot of post-production. But the irony is we both go after the exact same thing. We're both after creating this unique image that's ours, that tells our story, that is about us. She just does it a much different way than I do. And, so she'll spend, 100 hours in post-production and 20 minutes shooting it. And I'll spend, 100 hours getting it right, shooting it, setting it up. And if I do 20 minutes post-production, that just annoys the shit out of me. I'd like 2 minutes is way more than I'd like to do. So for me, the process. So there's really two parts. There's the process, which I think is individual. But I think if you go back to Renee and I again, I think we both apply the same intent to our work. So everything that's in Renee's image is with her intent, or at least most of it. And I'm speaking for her. I don't, I haven't asked her this question, or I might have. I don't remember. But I'm pretty sure that most artists put a great deal of intent in their work, and that's probably the thing for me that is the defining, not the process, not the actual, whether you use AI or not AI, or you use post-production filters, or to me that's just personal, and I probably choose the extreme one-sidedness of avoiding any type of post-production possible.
Yeah, it's interesting. See, one of the things that one of our previous conversations, one of the things you said that continues to haunt me to this day, Steve Richard, is you were talking about the you said, I'm paraphrasing, but you said something to the degree of, anyone can take a photo of a pretty person. But then you have to, is it just a pretty person? If you were to swap that person out for an average or unattractive person, is it still a great photograph? Right, and that stuck with me, because now I look at, that's why that haunts me, because now I look at photos all over the place, and I'm looking at these photos, I'm like, is that a great photo? Is it art? Is it a work of art, or is it just capturing a beautiful person that was blessed with genetics?
and I'll give you my mantra, my quote. And it's funny, because anybody who's ever assisted for me, they probably would throw up if they heard me say this, because they hear me say it about 400 times a day. But I have this mantra that really goes, it's easy to take a picture of a beautiful thing. It's really difficult to take a beautiful picture. And it's even more difficult to realize the difference. And you can replace beautiful with anything powerful, exceptional. It really, in a way, doesn't matter. But most people go around and take pictures of exceptional things and call it an exceptional photograph. And sometimes it is. Sometimes that photograph of an exceptional thing is an exceptional photograph, but that's not the measure. Correlation and causality aren't necessarily the same thing here. Right. And so, and I think for me, that's always been a measure, especially when you shoot beautiful things. So, for example, I work with human bodies, and if you think the human body is beautiful, it's pretty easy to look at a photograph of, a nude male body that has an exceptional build, and think, oh, what a great photograph. And for me, the test is, no, do I feel anything looking at this? Does this bring any moment, any memory, any emotional response? And if it doesn't, then I'm pretty sure I probably just documented a beautiful thing, but I didn't necessarily create anything beautiful. Yeah, I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of this mantra that I've been using for a very, very long time, and I weigh it against every single thing I create. I use this measure, so I love that. It's one of the my kind of toolbox, my main tool in the toolbox.
And now, it's now you're there's a little Steve Richard on my shoulder all the time, talking into my.
That's creepy. Yeah.
There's a lot of people on my shoulder.
I would smush that right off. Yeah.
I hear voices. I want to talk a little bit about world building and intent. So when looking at your work. And, of course, I'll link to your galleries and show some of your images in the blog post for this episode. But, you speak of photographing with intent and being meticulous about the production process versus the post-production process. Are you building in your head kind of like a Marvel cinematic universe, a Steve Richard universe where you have little vignettes of characters in that world that you then have to capture in certain situations? Or is it more serendipitous?
It's both, and it's good. This is a really long answer to your question.
Good.
So I'm going to do it in a couple parts. So there's what I call a fundamental set of rules I use, and then each series I work on has its own set of rules, its own universe, if you wish. So I don't necessarily call it a universe. I call it I call it, in this set of rules, I describe something that I refer to as a personal dogma. So this is a set of rules that I apply to everything I create. And I apply them so rigidly, I won't allow anything through that doesn't meet this set of rules. So, for example, perfect body line is one of the things that's really important to me, and perfect dance body line, if you wish. So if you look at any of my images, you'll always see that the feet are pointed in a certain way. All the lines are really always drawing you back one way or another to the story, where the story's happening. I really like darkness with a sense of beauty. I like, for the most part, a sense of anonymity. So there's this whole set of things that I call a personal dogma that's global. I apply to everything. And then if I'm working on a particular series, for example, say the Obscuro, this series that we shot underwater, it has a few more laws of physics, if you wish, a few more rules. And I create what I call a stage. So it's not really a universe. I create kind of a stage or a persona for the series, and then everything has to fit in that persona. So what I don't do is I usually don't have a storyboard. I might have an idea of what the mood is and what the moment is I'm trying to create. But on the day of the shoot, other than the lighting, which I've usually worked out, and the basic form and the basic shape and story, then I create the image with everybody in set. And we start working bit at a time, meticulously, slowly, and it might take me a couple of days to get a final image. But most of the time, the final idea is iterative, and the story forms that way. But the universe isn't that well. The universe is the universe is really this set of rules, this personal dogma, and like I said, it depends on the series itself.
What does
that kind of get to where the question?
Yeah, okay, that does. Yeah, no, absolutely. Instead of being explicit about, this is this universe and these are these characters in the universe and let's move them around and put them like this. It's like you said, it's like in the world of 3D, computer graphics, you define a set of rules that, the gravity is like this or the wind is like that and the light's from over here and it's of this color, and then you put stuff in that world, and then it behaves explicitly pertaining to those rules, right?
And when it doesn't fit, if it looks, the neat thing about having such rigid dogma like this, it's really easy to edit, because if it doesn't fit, it just yells and screams at you. Mm-hmm. So, for example, every time we shoot a series, and usually a series takes 3 to 10 years or whatever, it depends. So it develops its own voice. I wrap this set of dogma around the particular series. And then, for example, I'll go back to Obscuro. We'd be shooting Obscuro and it'd be, oh, that's a really nice image, but it's not Obscuro. And I just delete it. Because it doesn't fit into that universe, as you say. It doesn't fit into that voice. Even if the story is a bit like what I'm wanting to say, I'm going to still have to mold it and shape it, fit it in, so I'm comfortable with it fitting into the series, which probably is a bit crazy, but it's just the way I like to work. But
it's the process. It is your process, which is
yeah.
There's so much to talk about, and one of the things that's kind of in my head was, I think you had mentioned before when we were having a conversation about the idea of permanence. Right. And I think what I had posed to you was, hey, we're in the digital world now. Like, what, you could create 1,000,000 versions of a particular print. Do you do that? And you had a very intriguing answer to that. Do you remember that conversation?
Yes. I've had this. So it's interesting. So first of all, when I create an image, I'm shooting. I usually shoot with phase 1 and have for the last 10 or 15 years. So I shoot tethered, and I shoot like a sculptor would sculpt. So I develop the image bit at a time, and I might work on the position of a wrist and a chin and an eye line, and then I'll keep changing it. It's iterative, and as soon as I get to an image that I think is better than the ones we've created in the last half hour or whatever, I'll go and select everything previous to this new image and delete it. And in fact, I love doing this in front of an intern that's visiting. So if I'm ever working with an intern from one of the schools, it's one of my favorite things to do is watch their body language when I go up and grab all these images and hit the delete button, just because they're shocked and horror at what I've just done.
Yeah.
So this process for me, this one that I now keep, and I keep working to see if I can fine tune and make the story better. It's, if I end up with a better image than that one, then I'll delete everything except for this one. And usually the only thing I'll keep is maybe I'll keep up one or two images that are, if I can't decide, I'll keep them as a backup in case I ever have a problem with this file before I get it, even though I shoot to a RAID before I get it offsite backup done. Yeah. And however, so to answer your question, so first of all, I'm only after one image, usually from a shoot. And it's usually part of a series. But when I release this image in print, or at least since the book Ariel, which is a couple of years now, I create one print, one signed print. It's one of one, and as soon as that's sold, it'll never exist in print again. It might exist in a book, and it might exist in a digital form, of course, but it's only one print. So I look at what I do is I'm really out to create this one piece of art, this physical piece of art. And once that's printed and owned or wherever it is, that's it. There's only one. And I know that really sounds batshit crazy because technically it's not like I'm a painter and I've only painted one. I could press the print button as many times as I want, but I refuse to. That's not what I do. It's not what I'm creating. I'm creating one piece of art.
That's what I found so intriguing, because we're in the digital age, right? And everything is zeros and ones, and things for better or for worse are driven by money, and if you create a Steve Richard print that there is demand for and people want that, and here's a scenario, Elon Musk, the founder of Tesla, SpaceX, all these different companies, says, yeah, I want a Steve Richard print in my dining room on the wall. Boom. And I know it has value because he says he only prints one. I've got one. Boom. I've got that. It's on my wall. And then let's say Bill Gates comes along and says, you know what? I like that print you got. I think I want that one in my living room. That would look really nice in one of my living rooms. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so in that scenario, you would say no. Would you say no? Or would you say
no? Of course I'd say no. And for me, I'd say, well, get a hold of, your friend and see if you can buy his. It's not important to me. So the irony is, I think you nailed it right. Just because the technology allows you to do something doesn't mean it's necessarily right for you to do it. And I think for me, the philosophy is really simple. I love the idea that I've created this one thing and there's only one of it that physically exists. And to me, that just makes me feel right. So that's what I'm going to do. And I will admit there's some series. So for example, in the Ariel book, there's 5 images that we did a Kickstarter for the book, and we released 5 images of these 5 images. And but the rest of the book is one. And this new series we're working on, Myth, is the same thing. It's one. Only one image will be printed, and so maybe I have this philosophy to think in order to be an artist, you have to take a vow of poverty, and I say that jokingly, but also not jokingly. And what I mean by that is I don't want to be focused on, oh, geez, I can sell 500 copies of this print. That can, I'm really focused on creating the work. That's all that's important for me. And I have to create a piece that really is part of me, part of what I do. And what I found is I've migrated to this creating one of one is the thing that just kind of solidifies it. It's the foundation that makes me feel really great about it, and I can't foresee ever changing it now.
Yeah, and that's the process. I mean, that even you saying those words inherently adds value to the work, right? Because people that are buying it, they can hear that echoing in the work. And
Yeah.
like, this thing for some reason is heavier. It has a weight to it that an ordinary print wouldn't, because I know that I have it, this is the only one of this, and I have it. And I have the commitment from Steve Richard that this is the only one.
Yep,
So,
it'll be the only one that I'll print. So, but here's what's interesting, I think, is you can. I mean, for me, this is important to have this one of one, but it doesn't. I don't think it makes the work more or less valuable in a way. The irony of this is a discussion we would go on. We could probably spend a week talking about this. But when you look at art and you look at what makes really good art, and then you look at what makes really expensive art, what makes art valuable, a lot of times they're somewhat independent of each other. And I think I've never been, so the motivation for me wasn't making the image more valuable. Without question, that's wonderful. And if you can talk Bill Gates into give me a great deal of money, I'll pick any of the remaining prints of Ariel, for example. I'd be happy to ship him a great big print. Yeah. But at the end of the day, that's not the reason. I didn't do this to make the art more valuable. I did this to just anchor what I do, and that's really the only reason. And if the spin-off is that the art is more valuable, great. But the marketing side is a cloud that I usually just confuses me. I don't spend a lot of time in it, and I would be the worst person in the world to take marketing advice from. Well, there might be someone worse, I'm not sure, but maybe my cat. I think my cat would probably offer better advice. So,
there's some politicians I can think of that you probably wouldn't take marketing advice
from. Yeah. So for me, I just didn't want to go down that road of marketing, whether this image is worth more or less, or because that really wasn't the motivation whatsoever. Yeah. In fact, and I'm not even sure, I've had this discussion with many of my friends sell prints and they sell limited editions. And we've had this, does edition size matter and blah, blah, blah. And, and what really matters if you're trying to make a lot of money with your photography is to market it properly and spend a lot of time and effort and hire really good people to market your product well. And I think that's way more important than deciding whether it's a 1 of 1 or 1 of 10 or whatever that is. That's not really relevant.
And it depends on your, and everyone's motivations are different, right? So
absolutely.
Yeah.
So this is. Sorry, I was going to say this is, and maybe this is the cop-out part, but my favorite thing about presenting and standing up in front of everybody and saying, look, I'm not really a photographer, I'm an artist. And everything I say is just my opinion. So take the pieces that make sense and throw all the rest away, because there's no laws of physics. This is just me rambling on. So there's a real beauty in that, as I can actually be a bit reckless in a way. It's not like I'm spouting anything that means anything to anybody but me, and the pieces that make sense to anybody else. So that's wonderful, but it's not really any truth. It's not really any kind of, like I said, marketing wisdom or anything like that. It's just the way I look at the world. That's all.
But it is. I think it's pertinent, and I think it's helpful because the exercise in constraints, I think, helps a lot, and is in a lot of ways liberating for a lot of people, where, you're doing, let's say it's a photographer and he's doing a model shoot, and there's the pressure of, okay, I got to get a bunch of images and let's do 12 different poses and outfit changes, and let's bring the makeup artist on and do 3 different looks, and, indoor, outdoor, wet, not wet, mud, all this stuff, so that you can have a suite of images to sort of pick through in Lightroom to find the one that works, versus the Steve Richard way of saying, I'm after this image. I'm after this one particular image, and I'm going to obsess over getting that image. To hell with everything else. I'm focusing my magnifying glass on the piece of paper to burn a hole in it right there, versus heating up the whole sheet of paper. I think there's liberation in that,
I agree. Actually, there's a huge liberation in it. I've come up through the normal, go to a shoot, and take 25,000 images and then hope one of these worked out. Or actually even earlier, I'd go to a shoot and take 25,000 images and think 25,000 images are really good, when in fact, when none of them were any good. But, I've certainly, I started in 1973. I've had as bumpy road as anybody else, and learned a lot of lessons, and still have a lot to figure out. But for me, and this is when I started off. When I really take the approach of I'm not really a photographer. I'm an artist. I'm trying to tell a story. I'm trying to create this moment that's really about me. The difference is, in my process, I allow that to develop while I'm even creating the work. So for example, I might start off on a shoot day and say, oh, I really want this darkness. I want this to be about the inner strength. I don't know, I'm making shit up as I go, but maybe loss. And I'm going to have it so, say I might have, a model, and I might say, I'm going to have it so you're really powerful, but you're looking at this empty chair as if this is, this is kind of a metaphor for a sense of loss. And then, and I'll be working on this, and we'll be doing the same thing, going through the process and saying, oh, this image definitely is much better. I think what your body language would be better if we just moved your shoulder a little bit and turned the hand so the gesture really meant something. And then the model will do something. I'll go, wait, wow, that's way better than everything we've done so far. I like what you've just, holy shit. Now it's all about power, and it's about not loss, but it's about maybe this emptiness is your choice. And my brain will go, oh, this is way better. And I just start again. And the same thing. The difference is I have my dogmas. I know what body language and line I'm going to use. I know what the lighting's going to be. I know what level of anonymity. All those things I don't have to stumble around with, because it's part of my personal dogma. But I'm not afraid to change in mid direction, to go, oh yeah, now we're going south. I knew we were going east, but now we're going south. And some days, I do go north and then south and then north and then south and then right back at the starting spot and end up nowhere. But usually I end up with an idea and somewhere to start again at the next time.
You know what that sounds a lot like? That sounds like the scientific method in science, right? It's like you test a hypothesis, and if it works, you do more of that thing, right?
That's true. It's true, yeah. And except there's very little science, I think, and whether maybe there's psychology, I don't know, but there's very little science thing. Yeah.
I'm interested to get your thoughts on just sort of the stigma around the nude photography, or the fine art nude photography industry. On the one hand, we have an influx of, some photographers that come in with varying motivations for taking photos of nude or scantily clad women, some nefarious reasons, some justified reasons. And then the spectrum from left to right, all the way from creep, all the way through, high-end fine art photographer, where you sit. So how do you reconcile the perception and the stigma around photographing the nude body, for, as hypocritical as it is, right?
Yeah.
Of photographing the nude body, and keep yourself out of the bucket of those guys that, we call them the GWCs, right? Guy with camera. How does that work for you?
Most of the time I just bury my head in the sand and don't think about it. But you're right. And I started off in the conversation. It's why I don't even like to use the word fine art nude, because it's true. I shoot fine art. I create fine art images, and 99% of the time with a nude body. But if you use that definition to search out fine art nude photography, you'll end up with 90% of pictures of beautiful things. And in most cases, and I just think, well, that's not really what I do. So one of the questions, it's pretty easy to weed it out and say, well, what was the intent of the shoot? Was it for the photographer, as you said, the worst case, a GWC, to be in the room with naked women or men or whatever it is you're interested in? and just so you can take photographs of them. I mean, well, I guess, yeah, that whatever, but that's not even really what that. So that's on the extreme. That's not even photography, right? That's more of a fetish. It's more of a, I don't know what it is.
Voyeurism, yeah.
Voyeurism, yeah. So, and then there's a lot of people that, so, and this doesn't necessarily apply to naked bodies. It could apply to cars. It could apply to trees. It could apply to anything. And I don't mean this in a fetish sense. I mean this in a documenting beautiful subjects. So a lot of people would find nude bodies a beautiful subject, and they go in and document them, and that's fine as well. But there's no intent. There's no self there. You haven't put yourself in this image. You're not trying to say anything. All you're trying to do is capture or document this. And that's a real craft. And there's nothing wrong with that, whether it's a girl or boy or a tree or a car. But for me, that's really starting to get to this definition of photography. And for me, I move way past that and say, no, I'm not a photographer. I'm an artist. I like to tell stories, create moments, if you wish, of and to kind of set metaphors in place. And I love to do it with the human body, not unlike artists for 1,000 years or more. And so it's not a new subject, and what I do certainly isn't new. So I'm going to give you, and I can't remember her name, but this is a bit of a story. But I used to check my website stats every month, and now I check it every year. But I used to check my website stats, and one month I got this huge hit from a blog. I think it was called Pretty in Pink. And the woman that wrote this blog was a model, used to be a model. And she did this whole blog about fine art nudes. And I wish I could give you the link, but I don't even know what the link is. And she talked about how, it was kind of appalling to her, for the most part, that she had modeled a great deal as a fine art nude model. And most of the time, she said, basically, it's just awful. It's people just taking pictures of nude girls, converting them black and white and calling them fine art. And she had this beautiful phrase that I even emailed her and said, if you don't mind, I'd like to use this in my presentations. And her catchphrase was, fine art nude is to photography what the dirty limerick is to poetry. And I thought that says it fairly well.
Ouch.
Yeah, it was definitely an ouch. And
There once was a girl from Nantucket, right?
Nantucket, yeah. So, and I thought, that's it. So she was bitter, of course, and I just choose to ignore it all. I just choose to. So, for example, you can have a magazine store with a FHM magazine, a girl holding her breasts up, looking at the camera very sexually, but you can't have one of my images. And I just think that's pretty nuts, isn't it? One's extremely sexual, and the intent is without question sexual. And then on the other side, there's just one that might have a nipple in it, a female nipple, because a male nipple is allowed. And it's not allowed. For example, it's not allowed on Facebook. It's not allowed on Instagram. And whereas the other one would be. And I thought, well, this is a very strange world. How about I just ignore it? I'm going to just ignore it, because it's not a battle you can fight and win. I can't stand up in a soapbox and say, that's wrong. Give me my freedom back. I mean, it's not that important. So
yeah, people with buckets of money have tried, right?
And you know what? Look, I'm kind of driven to do what I do. I love what I do, and I think what I do it's important to me. And so if it fits into certain parts of the world or it doesn't, I really don't give a shit. And it's also, that's why I don't even care what it's called. But I usually don't call myself. I usually don't say I shoot fine art nudes for fear someone's just going to, Google that. Mm-hmm. And most of the time what it brings up is, it depends on, your point of view, but it can be pretty significantly bad. And so it's a tough question, and it's probably a dialogue you could also spend a week on, along with what's the price of art. What makes a fine art nude? What's the definition of that? And so I usually just, once again, bury my head in the sand and don't even go there. It's not worth the discussion, to be honest.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, and focus on what's important to you and just keep drilling on that. As we wrap it up here, Steve, I wanted to just take it in the direction of education. So a lot of the photographers that are watching this, and a lot of them that are in the TWiP community, love to shoot this genre of photography and want to get better at it. What are some tips from you, to sort of move in the direction of, even if you're already competent at this art form, but you want to get excellent at it? How do you move in the direction of excellence?
Yeah, well, two things. One, I would slow down. And so if you walk in with a philosophy of, look, I'm going to get an idea today, not even an image. Today, I'm after an idea. And allow yourself to fail. So if you could walk into any environment and say, look, I don't know everything. I know very little, in fact. So I play with the Dunning-Kruger curve all the time. This brilliant psychologist that fully understood this when you know a little bit about something, you totally overestimate how much you know. And I've just done them an awful disservice by doing a Dunning-Kruger by pretending I know anything. But so a lot of people are afraid to say, look, I don't know very much about this, and today I just want to learn more. And that's the number one thing. And then to go in and say, look, failing is wonderful. I would shoot in my studio almost every day, and most days were failures, meaning I didn't end up with this world-class image, but I ended up with an idea, or I ended up discovering something that wasn't going to work, but might work if I do this change. And I think my number one advice would be to walk into a shoot, let everybody know that, hey, this is a creative day. Even if you've hired a model and hired a studio, and say, look, it's not important that I create this image today. What's important is I create the ability to learn something, to discover something, to maybe, and the irony is probably that has more potential for you to create an exceptional image than any other way, because now you're open, you're not closed and fighting any creativity. So that's number one. The number two thing I think would be, take some workshops or lessons from people that I think get the concept. So from artists, and in fact, I recommend, my inspiration is very rarely comes from photographers. It comes from artists. It comes from Caravaggio. It comes from the Pre-Raphaelites. It comes from, Frederick J. Watts. Frederick Watts. It comes from Herbert Draper. It comes from, artists that are totally about telling their story or their stories. And I find that a much better place for inspiration. So I think those things. And then if you really kind of want to work in the fine art nude genre and you don't know how to work with models that much, hire a model that's really a good fine art model. And tell them you haven't got a clue, and pay them to help you communicate, pay them to maybe, come up with a story and work together to say, how would we create this story without you posing and me just pushing 12 frames a second, what I call monkey mode, and having that, be the thing. In fact, I'll end with this story, but sometimes when I teach workshops, I would go up to the model firsthand and I would say, every time the flash goes off, I want you to rock this beautiful pose. Just do your stuff. And I would set the camera to do automatic at 1 frame a second or whatever. But I looked like I was controlling it. I was going, yeah, oh, beautiful. And everybody would be watching the model, looking at the screen. And I'd keep saying, yeah. And then I'd literally walk away from the camera and keep saying, yeah. And eventually I just could walk out of the room. And after a while, people would start to notice I wasn't even at the camera. And it's funny because you'd come back and look at the images on the screen and they'd all be pictures of a beautiful girl posing. And I would say, what did I have to do with this? Like, was there any intent here? Does this have anything to do with me? And of course, it didn't. The camera did all the decisions. The model did all the work. And I always find it really funny if you're going to be a fine art nude photographer, to use that term, you go book a model, you book a studio, and all you're going to do is push the button. Well, why wouldn't you just go have a coffee and and take that out of the equation, right?
Right.
So, so I think the approach for me would be to work with people who do get the concept, if that's what you're interested in, and 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 let yourself be wrong for a while. It's okay. Let people explain to you. Learn a bit and fail a bit, and it's okay to walk out of a shoot with no exceptional images, just maybe some ideas. That's totally fine.
Is it better, or maybe it depends is the answer, but is it better to go to a workshop that has half a dozen photographers shooting a model with an instructor, or is it better from a learning perspective for the photographer to say, what, follow Steve's advice, I'm going to go find an experienced fine art nude model and work with her one-on-one to collaborate on a story, or is it both? Does it have to be an or? Can it be an and?
Yeah, it maybe can. So for me, it can't. So I don't want to look. I'm not pissing on anybody's photography workshops. That's not my intent whatsoever. I'll tell you what I feel is not a good workshop. And so if walking in with 15 people all taking pictures of the same model posing, and you're not directing, right? And you're not tuning and controlling. But if all you're doing is sitting there with everybody else and taking the picture, I'm not sure how much you're learning. I think that just becomes an experience, and that might be that. If that's what you're interested in, that's fine. So if you're interested in that photography experience, and if that makes you comfortable, and if this is your first time working with, for example, a nude female model, and this makes you comfortable where you wouldn't have been before, well, great, then it has an advantage. But I don't think, in my opinion, you're going to learn very much compared to working almost one-on-one with a photographer. And for example, and I'm not trying to promote my workshops over anybody else's workshops or my philosophy, but I guess you did ask me the question, so I'll tell you. My philosophy in a workshop is I won't take any more than 6 people, and I only let one person shoot at a time. And that way we all get to kind of listen. And when they have a question, when I'm explaining to them, I'm also explaining it to everybody else. And a lot of times the person will either ask a question or they'll do something that no one else would have thought to ask, and not even myself would have thought about it. And everybody gets to learn something really important. But for me, I wouldn't do it any other way. And in fact, I'm starting to, so this is going to sound really batshit crazy. I've even got to the point of trying to get it down to 4 people in a particular workshop, except the economics are brutal at that point. But other than there's a workshop we've already booked in Montreal, any workshop after this, I'm not even going to let anybody keep images. So you come to the workshop, we take images maybe on just camera, but if you're there to get portfolio images, you're there totally for the wrong reason. That's not why you're here. Everything would have to be deleted, and I would maybe send out some images for reference with notes on them. But if you're there, if you're at a workshop to get portfolio images, then I think you're there for the wrong reason. That's not a workshop anymore. That's a photo greedy or a shoot event. And why are they even portfolio images? They're not really your image. You push the button, but,
right.
So that's kind of my philosophy. But I am not trying to shit on anybody else's teaching. That's not my intent whatsoever. This is just the way I look at the world. Take the pieces that make sense to you. Yeah.
I love it. And we'll end it right there. Steve Richard, thank you for taking the time to do this. Always a pleasure. Yep. And now people that have watched this video understand why I'm haunted by Steve Richard.
You just flick him off. That's easy.
He's right there. You won't let go. He's holding on right there. Well, Steve, I've got your URL up on the screen right here. Is that the best place for folks to go?
It's probably the only place. Yeah.
I was going to say, for the folks that are listening to the audio version, it's Steve Richard or Steve Richard, SteveRichard.com, right?
That's right. Yeah, I do have a Facebook page that I update Really rarely, like for example, I'm presenting at PhotoCon Hawaii in a couple of weeks, and presenting out of my living room to PhotoCon Hawaii, thanks to COVID. But so I'll do that on Facebook, but I never post images on Facebook because they're not allowed. So I refuse to censor them, so I won't post her. But so for me, the only social media, I don't have Twitter, or I don't even know what they are now. Old man, get off my lawn syndrome. But if basically the website's really the only place. If you want to contact me, there's a contact there. There's some behind the scenes videos if you're interested to see the processes, and it might take me a day or two to get back to people, but I get back to everybody. Anybody who sends me an email, I'm happy to show it back.
Fantastic. All right, Steve Richard, thank you for taking the time to do this.
My pleasure. And Frederick, thanks so much for inviting me. It's always awesome to talk to you. I look forward to the next time.
Oh yeah, we'll definitely do it again. Like you said, we have lots to talk about. We could do a whole episode just on, the whole nude fine art, controversy. Yeah. There's a million things for us to talk about. So
sounds good.
Okay, you have a great rest of your week, and be safe up there.
You too. Take care.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Bye-bye.
This is TWiP. This episode was sponsored by MPB, the world's largest online platform for used photo and video kit. Visit mpb.com.